If you are on a quest to heal from severe mental illness or trauma, your path will take you through this issue of self-love. So today I want to give you a bit of a systematic overview of self-love as it relates to healing from trauma and mental illness. Specifically, I want to talk about why we get it wrong, why we misunderstand what self-love is, or why we have such a limited conception of what it could be, why we have a real lack of nuance and understanding about the psychological cause and effect of self-love, and really get at, why people tell us to do it, and yet so few people can explain to us how to do it, especially in ways that really make a difference. So first, I want to talk a bit about myths and misconceptions we have about self-love. What are some of the complicating factors in our conceptual landscape that we enter into anytime we talk about self-love? We have a lot of negative views of self-love that are imbued into our culture. These things, like little cosmic rays, just beam into our brains from the times we are very little. So we're taught from a young age that self-love can conflict with certain virtues or commonly held values. So the first is vanity, right? From the Christian tradition, we have the story of Lucifer and the fall of the devil from this exalted status as this very beautiful angel who was just a little too into himself, and this created sort of the cosmic schism that we are all supposedly living in to this day. It definitely gives a certain impression that, well, if you appreciate the beauty of your own creation a little too much, then that you're gonna commit the ultimate sin of pride or thinking that you are like God. Meanwhile, the Bible tells you that you are made in the image of God, right? So obviously a lot of our myths and misconceptions, the places where conceptually there's major cognitive dissonance around our ideas of self-love and what it could be, a lot of it does come from religious upbringing. And this is just one tiny piece of it. But it doesn't just come from the Christian tradition. We have the Greek tradition, which influenced the Roman Empire, which obviously had a huge impact on the Western cultures that we are still carrying around today. So we have, just for example, the story of Narcissus, which this character in the Greek myth is the basis for what we call narcissism today. Now, if you are in a relationship with a narcissist, you will probably not find them gazing for hours at a time into a mirror. Like the original myth, the story, fable, or whatever you want to call it, it was about a character who was so into his own personal beauty that he would basically lose himself to the appreciation of his own good looks. And obviously this originated in vanity, but now we have this psychological concept of narcissism, a whole host of personality traits that can be incredibly toxic and have probably played a part in hurting you at some point. If you're the type of person watching this, you've probably known and not enjoyed the company of a narcissist. And it wasn't so much that they were really into how they looked, right? So again, this confuses this issue of self-love because, well, I don't want to be too self-loving. I don't want to appreciate the beauty of who I am too much, or else I'll be a narcissist. And we end up covering a lot of ground very quickly that doesn't really make any logical sense, but the attachment is there and it's deep. I'm just pointing these things out so we can clear the way, making the path toward to a new self-love, so to speak, a fresh perspective on it, much, much easier. Also, from other traditions, we have this idea of hubris, right? This specifically played a big part in Greek mythology as well. And this had a lot to do with confidence and one's capability. Anybody who's dealt with a lack of self-love will know that that definitely infects your sense of your own capability and can do so in a very negative way. So again, we are taught not so much how to be confident, but more so warned, don't be too confident. That idea of hubris is really there to balance out places where your self-love is becoming a little too self-aggrandizing to the point where it's going to cause you to wreck yourself, lest ye check ye self, so to speak. And if that native self-love never really got developed to begin with, well, this idea of hubris is just going to help prevent it from ever really taking root. We also run into fears of selfishness, right? A lot of people, when they encounter ideas of self-love, or when they start to understand like, oh, the process of me loving myself, geez, this feels like I'm being really selfish. You have been programmed socially, culturally, by parents, and especially if you dealt in childhood, if you were parented by someone who was a narcissist, they were going to make you feel extremely selfish for having any sense of self, any sense of boundaries, any sense of right and wrong, right? Part of the gaslighting that children of toxic parents go through is holding this huge amount of guilt over any desire to not just be treated like a giant piece of shit. And this gets us into the next topic, but we are going to have to clear the lane of this idea that self-love is selfish, especially in a negative context, something where it's a love or appreciation or prioritization of self that would prevent us from holding up the roles and responsibilities that we also value. And as we'll get to, we have to majorly reframe the way we think about selfishness and the way we prioritize ourselves in relationship to other people and the practical ramifications this has. That may sound like word salad, but it's really important because oftentimes, just to fast forward, we create this inverted pyramid where we're at the bottom, supporting all these people that depend on us and all the people we want to help. But practically speaking, this only prevents us from serving, from meeting our responsibilities, from taking care of other people. So practically speaking, some of our ideas about selfishness become very real blocks to us actually expressing our values of wanting to care for other people. And so much of our myths and misconceptions, so many of the internal roadblocks that we experience in the journey toward trying to be more self-loving, so we can end the self-hatred, so we can end the inner war, so we can end this dividedness that is the result of trauma, comes from what we might call the evangelical whiplash. Now, it's not native just to the evangelical tradition, the specifically North American flavor of evangelicalism, but the evangelical world is definitely the poster child for this type of cognitive dissonance, whereby it's really important in their view of Christian cosmology that Christians see themselves as basically irredeemable pieces of shit because of original sin, and that the only way to resolve this irredeemable status is some type of attachment to, you've hitched your wagon to the person of Jesus Christ. It's specifically the whiplash between you're an irredeemable piece of shit and also God loves you so much that you in his sight are so filthy he cannot even stand the sight of you. But if you check the Jesus box, he will love you so much all of a sudden that you're good with him, right? And in I think it's Galatians, Paul specifically talks about how, listen, you're no longer you anymore. You kind of live inside of Jesus. And now when God looks at you, he just sees Jesus. He doesn't see your disgusting humanity. He just sees Jesus. And so again, so much of the evangelical view of salvation really hammers home the majesty of Christ by comparing it to how much you suck, which isn't necessary. It's not the only pathway toward upholding the beauty and power of a deity. There are many other ways to worship that do not have to so actively denigrate the one who worships. Because, I mean, if we are talking philosophically in a theistic framework, if there is a God who has unbelievable majesty and it's so infinite, you do not have to be lessened, right? You would only have to be lessened by a God that is finite. Does that make sense? Because if the God is infinite, then there is no need to lessen the innate value of the mortal. You'd only need to lessen the innate value of the mortal if the bounds of God were finite. This is a very human way of thinking about God. This is a very human way of creating religious structures and theologies around how humans are to relate to the divine. It is, I think, one of the great hallmarks of where we find the division between what is hopefully God-inspired religious practice for those who practice versus what has been corrupted and tangled up by the small-minded thinking of we mere mortals. Because there isn't a very good philosophical grounding for a lot of these ideas. There's a grounding in theology, stories that have been passed down from generation to generation. And what's funny is that if you actually dig into, okay, but how do I arrange myself to this abstract being such that I assure that I'm somehow increasing my value in relationship to, right? It gets very messy very fast. You try finding two similar stories from one evangelical pastor to another. People say the words, but when it comes down to like, okay, but what does this actually mean in practicality? There can be this massive cognitive dissonance, which is a massive rift in the structure of a philosophy, whereby certain elements of that philosophy are in active conflict with other elements of that philosophy. And only people who are really knitted and married to this philosophy are willing to sweep those things aside. And anybody who points them out, well, you're bad. So even apart from those major instances of cognitive dissonance, there is a lack of philosophical continuity in a lot of the Christian traditions, religious traditions that people are brought up in, specifically in, the Western world. And these are so pervasive that they're going to impact the way people view love and self-love, even if they grow up in sort of a humanistic, secular household, because these ideas are being imbued into you. They are acculturating you from various media sources, friends and family who are religious. So in trying to throw out the bathwater of narcissism and hubris and selfishness, we end up chucking a whole lot of babies out with that bathwater. And we have to come back to center. We kind of have to clear the board and say, okay, my brain is filled with literal millennia full of people bumbling their way in the dark around this topic. I deserve, especially if I'm suffering severely from trauma or mental illness, and to have health, I need to move toward a more groundedness in reality. Then I need to clear the board of all the Sunday school things and all the cultural apparatuses that have been programmed into me. We're just holding them at arm's length long enough to create some space in the table to explore something new. You can keep all of your dogmatic views, all of your religious views. This conversation does not require you to abdicate any sort of religious view or self-assessment. If you are a born-again Christian, to have a productive conversation about what self-love is, you do not need to be, we're not saying that only like hardcore atheists get to have this conversation. No, if you can't tell, I have been deeply impacted by the Christian tradition. I have spent many years in evangelical churches of different stripes, the more like charismatic, but evangelical inspired churches, all the way through to your kind of salt of the earth Southern Baptist churches. I really seen and experienced it all. And at the time, I did so as a seeker, right? For many, many years, I was active in those traditions as a seeker, as somebody approaching it with deep humility, just wanting to be a better version of me and to hopefully be a more healthy and happy version of me. And in some ways I found that, but in many ways I found what a lot of people find, which is there's a great hollowness in a lot of it because of these cognitive dissonances and these philosophical inconsistencies that leave a lot of space for people to practice these things and never actually find the healing that they're looking for. And that is ultimately what I'm here to help you do. I have no particular interest in getting anybody to believe or not believe anything. That's totally not what we're after here. So what we're after here, really to recenter this conversation, is a practical shift in your ability to love yourself in a way that promotes your values, that encourages virtue, so that you can have a healthy self-love and to see the fruit of that in how well you are taking care of other people, how well you are contributing, and how much you're able and willing to sacrifice. So I'm recording this a little bit later. The video got very long, so I wanted to chop it up, make it a little more digestible. So that's going to conclude the section on the myths and misconceptions that really impact and limit our view of self-love, twist it in a lot of ways, but also really limit the possibilities for how we can conceive of self-love and how that's going to help us find real healing and deep wellness. So check out the next video where I will go into the obstacles towards self-healing. Some of it will dovetail with what we've just talked about and take us into the so what of a lot of these myths and misconceptions so we can start to sharpen our idea, practically speaking, of what self-love really is. If you have questions, please put them in the comments below. This is a new channel, so I really appreciate your help. If you can like, comment, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And yeah, check out the next video. Talk to you very soon.